Since the beginning of time, we've learned by passing stories and sitting around a fire and sharing with each other. Before even writing existed, people told stories. And so we've always been captivated by stories. And so maybe the story came from somebody else. It was our parents who said, don't get into sales, or, oh, that salesperson, what a jerk. And we hear these things and then we just adopt them for ourselves. So sometimes the story comes from someone else. Other times it comes from our own experiences. And the truth is that our brains are very patternistic. And the reality is, like, 90% of what we think today is what we thought yesterday. So we repeat the same thought patterns again and again, like soundtracks, as my friend John Acuff calls it. And so if we've had a soundtrack for 10 or 20 or 30 years, unless we check it and intentionally interrupt it, that same soundtrack is just going to play over and over and over again. So a lot of these stories are old and outdated, and they don't even feel true to us anymore, but we don't have an awareness that they're running around in the back of our subconscious.
Justin, my brother, welcome to the Superhuman Life.
Thanks for having me on, Frank. I'm excited.
Really excited for this conversation here as well. You know, sales is something I've spent vast majority of my life learning, training, developing, applying. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into your background, your wealth of experience and knowledge, because I know you help business owners increase their influence and increase their impact through sales and persuasion. So I think that, really maybe the best place to start here, Justin, is what is the biggest misconception that the average everyday person has about sales?
Yeah, that's a great question, Frank. And I think the truth is most people have old stories about what sales is. They've got stories that sales is pushy, or sales is manipulation, or sales is greedy, or sales is sleazy, or insert sales is negative connotation here. And I think that most people, when they get into business, when they become an entrepreneur or a salesperson or a coach or whatever it might be, oftentimes they're getting into business to provide great value. And then they realize, oh no, I have to sell to have a successful business. And that's something that I didn't really want to do. And I think what we need to consider is the stories that we have an awareness of them. Maybe write down the old story, sales is pushy, put it small on a big piece of paper so we realize it's not so big in our minds. And then cross that story off if it's not true for you, and maybe write the new, more empowering story underneath, which is sales with me is. And so I think people associate sales as like this ever-present thing that's one way with all people. And I think that we can more personalize it to the work that we're doing. And so sales with me is service. Sales with me is love. Sales with me is leadership. Sales with me is coaching. And so I think if we want to reframe the stories, that the misconception is that sales is inherently bad. And that's certainly not true. The truth is that sales is the responsibility of the person providing the service.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. I mean, sales is fundamentally necessary to keep an economy and a society moving forward. Without transactions, which is nothing more than sales, we wouldn't really have a society. I mean, it's got to be the exchange of goods for some type of value. I love how you talk about, like, it's these stories we tell ourselves. I think that so much of our perception and the reality that we experience is dictated by those stories that we do tell ourselves, whether the stories we tell about our past events, traumas, I work in the addiction space, whether the story we tell about what's going to happen if I try something. Where do some of these limiting stories with sales come from?
Well, they come from people's experiences, and they come from the stories that people have heard from others. Since the beginning of time, we've learned by passing stories and sitting around a fire and sharing with each other. Before even writing existed, people told stories. And so we've always been captivated by stories. And so maybe the story came from somebody else. It was our parents who said, don't get into sales, or, oh, that salesperson, what a jerk. And we hear these things and then we just adopt them for ourselves. Okay, sales was bad for my dad, or he didn't like it, or my mom felt intimidated by the wrong salespeople, or my parents or grandparents were taken advantage of, so sales must be bad. So sometimes the story comes from someone else. Other times it comes from our own experiences. And the truth is that our brains are very patternistic. And the reality is, like, 90% of what we think today is what we thought yesterday. So we repeat the same thought patterns again and again, like soundtracks, as my friend John Acuff calls it. And so if we've had a soundtrack for 10 or 20 or 30 years, unless we check it and intentionally interrupt it, that same soundtrack is just going to play over and over and over again. So a lot of these stories are old and outdated, and they don't even feel true to us anymore, but we don't have an awareness that they're running around in the back of our subconscious, just kind of stuck there.
Yeah, I love that. I'm not sure if you've experienced this. I've done a lot of work in the business coaching spaces as well. I feel a lot of people don't have a clear definition of what they even are talking about when they're talking about sales. How do you define sales?
Yeah, for me, sales is simply making it as easy as possible for the right people to say yes. Ultimately, I believe that if sales is done right, I'm going to help people become more of who they were created to become, or achieve more of what they want to achieve, or receive more of what they want. Like at the very least, in sales, we're helping people buy something they want. And so, if we're helping people get more of what they want or become more of who they were meant to become, that's a really valuable thing. And when we ask the right questions, ultimately we're helping people make the best decision for themselves. And again, if we're wanting to be influential and strategic and thoughtful as an entrepreneur, as a salesperson, our job is to make it easy for the right people to say yes. And also to recognize that our job is to make it easy for them to say yes, not to make the decision for them. We have to ultimately trust people to make their own decision. And it's also not our job to make the wrong people say yes by deceiving or twisting an arm or staying in the process until yes, no matter what. It's okay to let people go. And if we're abundant and we recognize that we already have more than we could ever possibly need, we know that we don't need any one sale. We don't need any one client. We don't need any one customer. And so we can let go a little bit and lead and coach and ask great questions to help people make a great decision. And again, be willing to let go of the people who aren't right while making it easy for the people who are to say yes and jump in.
Yeah, that's so great that you clearly like there's two distinct, right? There's the people that our product is for. Our job through sales is to make it as easy possible for them to say yes, that because we know that's it's and they're going to understand that this is exactly what they need. And a lot of times there's going to be people, whatever it is we're selling, product, service, it doesn't matter. There's going to be a subset of people that it's just not for. So I love that distinction between we're here to serve and help the ones that ultimately need us, and then eliminate the ones that we know are not going to be right. And I think that's where a lot of people think it's like, no, we're pushing people into something that they ultimately don't want. Sales is never about forcing somebody to give you money for something that they don't want or they're not going to benefit from, correct?
Yeah, it's an invitation, and we might want to even rewrite what we call sales. It's an invitation more than anything else. People think of it as like a pitch or a spiel or something like that, or a push or a challenge. And I think that we should lovingly challenge our clients to make the right decision even when they're scared. And yet, I believe that sales is more of an invitation than anything else. And so I work in the coaching space, so I'm specifically helping people make a decision on whether or not to buy a coaching service. But ultimately, at the end of the call, over the course of the conversation, I'm helping them find clarity in where they're at, what they want, what the challenges or problems are that stand in the way, and commit to solving the problem. Whether they buy my service or not, there's great value in that. At the end of the call, though, if I know I can help them, I'm just going to invite them to something that I know can help them get what they want.
Yeah, no, that's great, man. I'd love to go back a little bit, maybe into your journey into sales. I mean, now I know you're helping business owners, you're helping coaches specifically develop powerful companies, impact, influence, all these great things, right? When did sales become called a passion or something that you were just like, this is where I'm supposed to be?
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, I had to have been one of the last people to do this. When I was 18 and just graduated high school, I opened the newspaper, like the real physical paper newspaper, and looked in the classifieds to job search for a summer job. And I ended up getting a job selling Cutco kitchen knives and direct sales appointments, sitting at the kitchen table, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and selling them $1,000 or more set of kitchen knives. And that direct sales experience was certainly scary and uncomfortable and different than anything I'd ever done before, but it was also exhilarating. I remember making my first sales and fist pumping on my way back to my car and just feeling so excited. I earned commissions. I got the job done. It felt like a game. It felt like strategy. I've always loved board games and sports and chess and strategy, and sales felt like that. And it was also an opportunity to just connect with people and have a good time. And I recognized that for me, it was really fun. And I also found community and culture inside of my sales office with other salespeople and entrepreneurs who I recognized were really growth minded, personal development, and professional development minded, and being around those types of people because it's not easy. Sales and entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart. It's a challenge. And the kinds of people who can persist through the challenges that exist in sales and business are the kinds of people that I want to spend time with. And so I think I fell in love in my late teens and early 20s with sales and really recognized pretty quickly that was it for me. it wasn't until later on that I recognized that I wanted to specifically coach people on sales. I thought I was going to coach men on their relationships, being husbands and dads, and some business stuff, but integrating faith as well. And ultimately, some of those clients were coaches, were entrepreneurs. And what I realized was the best thing I could do was help them in all the different ways that they were serving their communities and their clients, bring their messages to life and do that through high integrity, high conversion sales. And so I niched down a little further in a pivot a couple years into running our business to really focus on sales.
Yeah, I'd be curious your thoughts on this. I'd love to maybe kind of dive deeper in here. You talked about you thought you're going to be helping men in their relationships, in their personal lives. I believe ultimately sales training is really training in communication. I love that you mentioned the direct sales. That was my entry point into really sales. I mean, yeah, I had a landscaping business when I was in my teenage years. I was selling the services, knocking on doors. But the real power for me, the ability to influence and the ability to control your income came in a direct sales. I was selling rainbow vacuum cleaners, similar to kind of the Cutco's, this overpriced water vacuum cleaning system. We literally would knock on somebody's door the middle of the afternoon. Hey, we're doing surveys for Coke versus Pepsi versus Diet Coke. Would you be interested in participating in this? We're going to give you a free case of Coke. That was our kind of pitch to get into the door. Then once we're in the door, the Coke is then followed by a pitch, which turned into a 2-hour presentation on why their vacuum cleaner sucks and how it's leaving them unhealthy. But dude, I remember the first time that person pulled out the checkbook and $2,500 for literally me knocking on their door 3 hours before changed my life. I think any guy that is struggling, any young man, and you're not on a trajectory to maybe develop a trade, you're not, really focused on what my career is going to be. Maybe you haven't really figured that out, but you're in that 18 to kind of 22, 23. Get into some direct sales because I do believe that it's fundamentally training for communication. So I'd be curious with you, with some of the clients and maybe even in your own life, once you started mastering sales, how did you see the carryover and crossover into your relationships, the ability to manage communication with your wife or the ability to maybe lead a team or maybe even just having regular conversations with the fellas, right? I think there's a carryover and crossover in every single area of our life.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And you're right. Sales is all about communication. It's all about relationships. It's all about leadership when it's done right. I believe that like a lot of the skill sets that are developed through great sales experiences that lead into and stumble into all of our other relationships and parts of our lives include listening. Well, like I learned through sales to listen well. I've always liked to talk. And one of the interesting misconceptions is like, yeah, you like to talk, get into sales. And yes, what sales actually taught me, though, is to talk less, to ask more questions, to really listen with a full presence. And so, if you need to listen more, sales might be for you. If you don't like to talk, sales might be for you. The reality is, when sales is done at the highest level, it's not done well because of great one liners or the things you say or the way you build features and benefits and value in what you're selling. It's done through asking great questions. If you want to be a master of sales, coaching, leadership, parenting, marriage, relationships of any kind, become a master at asking great questions, truly listening to the other person, which is so rare, and then be insatiably curious. Go 3 or 4 layers deep. I used to have a post-it note on my computer that said, why question mark, why question mark, why question mark, why question mark, to remind me that the juice, the emotion, the real stuff is 3 or 4 layers below the surface where people don't typically ask. And you know what our wives want us to do when she comes home and talks about her day? She wants us to say, oh, tell me how that felt. What else happened? Why is that so important to you? Tell me more. Then what happened? Like for us to like be super curious with our wives or our kids, there's no greater gift we could give them. And I learned to be super curious by being in sales.
Dude, I love that so much. Because it's so true, right? People think, yeah, the most talkative person, that kind of outgoing extrovert individual that's just like quick-witted and he's always got the best kind of reaction, like that may be somebody that's going to be great, but in reality it's going to be the guy that's going to be able to listen, be present, and then kind of pick up on cues outside of what you're saying. So the ability to listen, be present, obviously is a great characteristic of a salesperson. What would you say are some other character traits or characteristics that a person's going to need in order to be successful in sales?
Yeah, what we really talk about is we talk about the art of influence, and I teach kind of 6 pieces, and there's 3 that are internal and 3 that are external. So if you're willing to take a few minutes, I'll explain them really quickly.
Dude,
But I think
we
these six
got yeah, we
pieces.
got 45 minutes. We'll
All
go.
right, all right, let's roll then. The first one is internal, and it's about our identity. A great salesperson has a really strong identity, which means that they believe in themselves. They think good things about themselves. They have a really positive self talk. Now, many people enter sales or even work through sales without having a strong identity. They can still have success, but it's so much easier when we believe positive things about ourselves. If we believe that we're a great salesperson, we're going to get better results in sales. We're also going to enjoy prospecting and getting on calls and look forward to it more. If we believe that we're a great coach or a great leader, it's going to be easier for us to perform in sales. If we think we're valuable and worthy and a child of God and like we see ourselves the way he sees us, we're going to be so much better. We're going to show up differently and people are going to receive us differently. People receive us in so many ways in the way that we receive ourselves, and the things that we believe about ourselves, they believe about us. And so you recognize, ideally the appropriate leader is probably really balancing confidence and humility. They've got a lot of confidence and certainty. They know they can do it, but they've also got a certain humility that says, I don't have all the answers. And so many people have helped me get here. And you can experience somebody's confidence and humility in their identity, in the way that they feel about themselves, in the conversations you have with them. And if somebody has too much confidence, it's arrogance, and we can recognize that so quickly. If someone has too much humility and they're lacking the confidence piece, it probably looks like weakness or scared, fear. It's going to be harder to receive leadership from that person. And so I think a great salesperson knows who they are and is developing who they are and has a positive self-talk. And if you're struggling with that, you might consider prayer, asking God for help there. You might consider affirmations of positive things. You might consider the environment of people that you surround yourself with, and making sure that you're surrounding yourself with the kinds of people who speak life and believe into you, and believe in your business and your dreams. The second thing internally is what I call your emotional state. I think that great leaders recognize that they're they have an emotional wake. Like what they feel is contagious. Emotions are contagious. If I'm in a theater and everyone's laughing at the movie, I laugh way more than when I'm watching that same movie at home by myself, because that emotion is contagious. If you're watching a movie and somebody's crying, you might cry, or you might at least feel the weight of the emotion. Like I watched Rudy, and at the end of the movie, his friends crying in the stands and cheering for him, and like the whole crowd. I get weepy in that movie because I feel all of the emotion. It's really contagious. And so if we know that emotion is transferable, one of the things that I can recommend that people do is they really have a pre-call ritual, a 1 or 2 or 3 minute strategy to get themselves feeling as good as possible, reaching their peak state. When I'm at my best, I feel confident, loving, and peaceful. How can I get there in a minute or two? I can pray, I can stand up, I can throw my arms out, make myself big, I can have some affirmations, I can, for some people, they might sing or dance or do some push-ups or play some music. There's all different kinds of ways we can do this. We can do visualization or remembering, but being intentional about feeling a certain way and getting into a peak state can help us perform better in sales, speaking opportunities, etc. And if we learn how to do that through sales, of course, we can bring that into our relationships. We can bring that when we're playing sports or performing or parenting or doing almost anything, is that remembering of how to get into a peak state and choosing our emotion rather than letting it choose us. And then the third one internally is what I would call your stories. We talked about this already. Having an awareness of the stories that you have. Great salespeople, great leaders have an awareness of the stories they have about sales, money, people, their own value, their prospects, their wife, their kids. Like you can choose what to focus on and what stories to tell yourself. And so great salespeople have an awareness of the stories. They're willing to break old patterns and tell themselves empowering stories, which of course factors into all other parts of our life as well. Our stories become our reality. Externally, what a salesperson has, if they're doing a really good job, is connectivity, communication, and leadership. Connectivity is about how connected we are to the other person. Ultimately, this comes down to communicating in a language that the other person can receive. And I'm paying attention to a few things when I'm meeting somebody. What's their level of volume that they communicate at? If they communicate at a higher volume, I'm going to raise my volume. My grandpa doesn't hear very well. He speaks loud because he doesn't hear very well. If you speak too quietly because that's your style, you're going to miss the mark with him. He's not going to tell you what over and over. He's just going to let it go and not hear what you were talking about. My grandma, on the other hand, speaks really quietly, softly. If you come in to sell her a vacuum and you're loud and coming in hot, she's going to have a really hard time receiving you. She's going to feel intimidated and uncomfortable and want you to leave. And so totally different volume needed between these two people. I'm going to pay attention to pace of communication, tone, but I'm really going to pay attention to emotion and energy. And if somebody's feeling like really excited, they come into a call and I'm like, hey, how are you doing? They're like, oh my gosh, I've had the best day. I'm not gonna be like, oh, my day's been frustrating and horrible. Now I might do that with my brother or my close friend or somebody I want to have be my coach and my leader for a few minutes. But on a sales call, I'm going to meet them where they're at, meet them in that energy, and be like, oh my gosh, I love days like that. I'm so excited to be talking to you. On the flip side, though, if somebody comes into the call and they're like, I'm like, how's your day been? And they're like, oh man, it's been a just back to back, busy, frustrating day. I'm like, oh man, ugh. Days like that are the worst. Let me ask you a question. Is this still a good time for us to connect? And if they're like, yeah, this is good, I'm like, okay, cool. Do you want just like 2 or 3 minutes to use the bathroom, drink some water, take a breath? I can wait. That gets at me into rapport with somebody really quickly, and I can pace and lead from where they're at emotionally and energetically to a higher level throughout the course of the conversation. But I need to meet them energetically where they're at. I need to have empathy. These things make us better husbands, fathers, friends, neighbors, etc. So many things. But I developed these skill sets through sales. The second piece of it is communication, which again is learning the communication skill sets. We could talk about that for hours. I won't, but I'll remind us that asking great questions is really important. Learning how to listen with a great presence is truly important. Not just thinking about what we're going to say next in a sales conversation, but asking a real open question and listening with full presence and being curious to ask follow-up questions before moving on to the next step of our process. Such a gift. A well-placed pause can help so much in communication. Our voices have a lot of range. There's a lot of opportunity in how we can communicate, and we need to make sure that we're communicating in a way that the people we're with can receive and that's effective for them, that also honors what I call our authentic leadership voice, which is this is the last piece is leadership. I believe that every single person, every single man has an authentic leadership voice. And my voice when I'm communicating with you on this podcast or speaking or coaching or selling might be a little bit different than the voice that I have when I'm sitting on the couch watching a football game with my friends or when I'm laying in bed with my wife. I'm going to communicate in different voices. We have so much range. But I found my authentic leadership voice as a salesperson and as a leader where there's not a press. I'm not trying too hard. I went through that experience of like trying to be somebody else as a salesperson and communicate in their voice or their language, their tone. And I know I mentioned before, this might seem contradictory, trying to honor the person we're with by communicating in tone, volume, pace, etc., language, words that they can receive, but inside of our range of our authentic leadership voice. And so we need to find that, which requires a certain amount of courage, self-discovery, the growth of our own identity, to find our communication pace, volume, tone, all of it, that really is authentic to who we are and also honors our audience.
Yeah, that's great, man. There's a lot there for us to chew on here a little bit. A couple of things I want to follow up with. Just from those six that you shared. So just to recap, make sure I got this correct. There's six things that we must master, three being internal, three being external. The internal ones are going to be our identity, right? The way that in which we see ourselves first, our emotional state, and then going to be the stories, which we talked about from the beginning. So those are going to be the internal ones that we have to master. Externally, it's going to be our connectivity, our communication, and then our leadership. And mastering those is going to put us in a position to master the influence, to master the persuasion, ultimately build the business of our dreams, and go on in and produce all those sales. With the internal ones, Justin, what is the biggest or the most challenging one that people struggle with mastering?
It really probably oscillates between identity and stories. Most people, I think, struggle with their own identity and their own worth and their own value and questioning whether or not they're enough. And they walk around with a really negative self-talk, and it wasn't something that they created for themselves. It was something that their parents or grandparents or teachers or someone else when they were really little gave to them, when they talked down to them, when they labeled them in certain ways, and like that stuck with them, and they thought, well, maybe this is who I am. And it's hard to break the patterns of an identity that we've had since we were little, and sometimes we don't even have a recognition of it. But so many people have that really painful self-talk, and they talk themselves out of how great they can be, and that's really, really hard for some people. For others, they've got a really healthy identity. If your identity is in progress, though, it's not where you want it to be. You might consider writing empowering I am statements. I am a great leader. I am a worthy person. I am a child of God. I am. Some positive things and reinforcing those on a regular basis. The other one, though, is that some people, even with a strong identity, do really struggle with their stories, and they get caught up in thinking that sales is bad or money is bad, making money is bad, being wealthy is bad, because of stories that they received from other people. And so if they're really stuck in those stories, even with a positive identity, somebody who thinks making money is selfish or greedy or bad is going to subconsciously find ways not to make more money. My story around money is that the more I earn, the more I can give. My wife and I have always given 10 to 20%. And I've got a healthy story that the more I earn, the more I can give. So there's no blocking earning more money, because to me that's a really positive and good thing. But even somebody with a strong identity who knows who they are and believes in themselves might have a story around money that needs to be healed, giving and receiving that needs to be healed, sales that needs to be healed before they're going to be able to move past those roadblocks and have the success that they want to have. So it probably varies between those two. I think most people can get in a peak emotional state, but the outer two are the ones that are most important.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'd agree 100%. And I love how you explain how intertwined they are. I mean, ultimately, our identity is the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. So, you're going to change the identity. You're going to have to learn to rewrite stories. And I think the empower thing comes in there when you begin to take the steps to rewrite your own identity. You realize the story and how you have control of what those narratives are, of what those stories are. Working on your own identity, in my opinion, is one of the greatest things that we can do to help us get to the next stage in any area of our life. I've always said that I believe all lasting transformational change starts with an identity change first. If you're going to increase your income, if you're going to excel in business, you maybe are struggling with the identity of an entrepreneur, you're going to have to change that first. And the success, the transformation is going to be the byproduct of that. So I love that we touched on the internal one. I would agree 100%. It's most people's identity that holds them back from breaking through. Talking about these external ones, so the connectivity, the communication, the leadership. I love how you kind of set it up, and it's like a framework, right, that we can now begin to operate from. And because I think most people think you're either born a great salesperson or you're born somebody that's never going to succeed in sales. Once again, that being a story that we're going to tell ourselves of. But you've laid out a framework here. How do you then navigate, right? Because some people are going to hear this. They're going to say, okay, well, you're listening, you're paying attention to body language, you're using different tonalities. You're almost on the verge of manipulation at a certain point. And I'm sure maybe this is some pushback you've gotten. So how do you kind of navigate persuasion, influence, sales, and not crossing into manipulation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Before I answer that question, Frank, I want to mention one thing that kind of popped up as you were talking a moment ago, which is I want to recognize your audience, anyone who's listening to this podcast, based on everything I know about you and your podcast. If people are listening to this podcast, they're at the very least telling themselves the story that they can grow, that they can get better, that they can transform, that there's more for them. The very nature of the people who are listening to this podcast is they have enough self-worth and belief in their own identity to say, like, I'm worth the time it takes to listen to a podcast like this. And they've got empowering stories already. So if somebody's listening to this and saying, oh man, this identity stuff, the stories, shoot, that's me, I want to recognize you. You're probably closer than you think. And this isn't like an on off switch, it's the turn of a dial. And it doesn't have to be that extreme or that intense. And so many of your listeners are probably so close, even if they're feeling frustrated or further away than they'd like to be.
Yeah, that's great, man. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So then getting into your next question about persuasion, influence versus manipulation, man, it is a fine line, right? We want to be strategic in being thoughtful about how we're communicating and the way that we're showing up for people, again, with the outcome of making it easy for the right people to say yes. If we're not careful about paying attention to the way we communicate and our language patterns, then we might communicate in a way that tells people not to buy, even if that's not what we're actually saying. And so there has to be a certain awareness of how we communicate to have a positive outcome on the other person. But the line between manipulation and influence, ultimately, like, and I know people might not want to hear this, but it's gray because it has to deal with your intentions. So my intentions are to truly help and serve and love people well. And my intentions are to recognize when what I have to offer is and is not a fit for someone, and to not even offer it to somebody it's not a fit for, and to let people go when I recognize that their objection is really valid and really true and like is the right decision for them right now. The boundary that they're setting is appropriate, to let it go. And so my intentions are pure, my integrity is strong. Therefore, what I'm doing is influential because I'm trying to make it easy for the right people to find the courage to take action. Whereas it becomes manipulation when we're trying to get every single person to take action, whether it's right for them or not. And the strategies might be similar. It comes down to how we behave in the end of the conversation and ultimately like what's going on in our own heart and our own ability to discern things, which is, it's interesting. I hear people say all the time, like in the Christian world, God told me blank. And that's an interesting statement because I haven't heard God speak to me in a voice. I have felt like God directed me. There's been two or three times in my life where I felt an intense experience of God directing me, and I felt like I heard from Him in that direction. I didn't hear a voice though. It came from my own mind. And so how can I discern between that being my will and something that came from my mind versus something that God gave to me as inspiration through my own mind? Very fine line, right? And so somebody can say it was this versus that, and we probably can't tell the difference. Uh, in authenticity in many cases. However, most people these days like just get a feeling in their gut, like the person I'm with, I can trust them or I can't. And so what I would say is, while it's hard, just like it's hard to discern, was that thought something from me or did God give that to me? Is that person being manipulative or influential with my best interest at heart? Hard to tell for sure the difference, and oftentimes the strategy looks the same, but ultimately I would just advise like consumers, prospects, like if you're on a sales call with someone or you're the salesperson, trust your gut. If you're the salesperson and something about what you're saying or doing or the strategy that your sales manager or your mentor told you to employ doesn't feel right, then it probably isn't right. If you're the person on the other side of the sales conversation and the way the call is going and the nature of the person you're talking to, it just doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. And so we have to be able to trust ourselves there. But as the salesperson, just check your intentions. I pray all the time, God, help me make it easy as possible for the right people to say yes. And also, like, help me to be generous and giving and loving and to have high integrity in what I'm doing. And as you bless me, help me to bless my community and my church and my clients and my family so much more and more and more, and do this all for good. And so that's I think helpful in maybe having people around us who we can trust, who can shine a light on us if we're acting out of integrity or losing ourselves.
Yeah, that's great, man. I'd love to maybe circle back to the God as well. Might end up getting us both in trouble, so we'll see if we can get that part back, because I have a lot of strong opinions around some of the things that you shared there, and some of the business owners and just people out there that are like leading with God, like buy this because God told me to sell it to you, right? And it's like, so I'd be curious your thoughts. I'm going to circle back there, maybe if we have the time. But why we're talking about this difference between persuasion, influence, and manipulation, I'd love to get your thoughts on product or service and the role that that plays in sales. Because if you're selling a dud, like if you're selling, piece of shit, like you should feel bad about manipulating or even influencing people to purchase it. But if you have a product that you know is right for somebody, right? You know that whatever you've created, whether it's a service, a coaching program, or a product that's going to improve somebody's life, if you truly have spent the time in building an incredible product, it's my belief that it is actually your obligation to do everything within your power to influence that person to purchase it from you, because you know on the other side of it is going to induce some type of positive change within their life. So speak to the importance of building, positioning yourself, selling a great product versus I'm just going to jump in whatever's going to produce the highest level commission for me.
Yeah, that's that's really important. And what I'd like to say is I'd encourage people to not sell something that you don't think is a great product or service. Like if you recognize, like, okay, this thing is not actually good, ideally do not sell it. And I'd like to make that like a 100% draw a line in the sand kind of comment. I do recognize that people need to feed their families and provide, and sometimes they're in the job that was the job that they could get right now that could provide for their family. And so there's some exceptions to this. That's a hard situation. If you're selling something, a product or a service that you don't really believe in because you have to put food on the table for your family and you don't think you have other options, whew, I don't have all the answers. I'm praying for you. If you are in a position where you have options, and most salespeople and entrepreneurs do, be certain that you're selling something that you feel really good about selling. Otherwise, it's never going to feel right. And if you're in a position where you're selling something that's not right, maybe put a deadline. Say like, if you have to keep doing this for a period of time, say by June 1st, I'm done with this. By January 15th, I'm done with this. Put a date on the calendar and like create some urgency with that deadline to find something new. And yes, it's super important to sell something that you believe in. And so as an entrepreneur, as a coach, myself, like I get to design my program and the price is pretty arbitrary. I get to decide exactly what I want to offer and exactly the price point I want to offer it at. The truth is I find that most coaches and entrepreneurs who are in a service industry and get to choose their price points choose too low of a price point. The problem isn't that they're selling something that's not great for the prospect or the client. The problem more often than not with entrepreneurs is that they're selling something that's not a win for them to sell at the price they're selling it at. Many of them design programs and products and services and offerings that will never help them achieve their goals, that are priced too low out of a fear of making too much money, or a fear of sales, or a fear of not being good enough, etc. And what we need to recognize in business is win-win or no deal. That's, I believe, the greatest relational energetic. And so we need to make sure that what we're selling is a total win for our prospects and clients. And it also has to be a total win for us. It has to be a total win for us to sell this product because it feels good, because we know it is good. Or it has to be a total win for us to service this client because that brings us joy and is healthy for us. If a client sucks and they're a pain in the butt and they're bringing you like the opposite of joy, they're bringing you stress and frustration and making you worse as a husband and a father and whatever other roles you are, a neighbor, a friend, because they're just so heavy to work with, let them go. We don't need any one client. And so I think that that's important to recognize both sides of this. Yes, we need to sell something that's good for the other side, and we need to make sure that we're honoring our needs as well.
Speaking specifically to the online coaching space, I'm curious your thoughts. I feel people, as we're talking about building a great product, I'm going to kind of go in the opposite direction here. I think a lot of beginner coaches, right? Like this is not somebody that's even accomplished a 5K month. This is the person that's just like, I have this dream to transition online. Maybe they're working full-time somewhere else. Maybe they're a trainer in the gym. They're trying to build their online business. My experience working with hundreds of these type of individuals is that they spend too much time product development and they never get out to selling anything. I believe the quickest way to improve your sales is get the repetitions in. Yeah, it's going to be great. You can hire a coach. You can listen to a podcast, listen to a book. It's all going to equip you with a little bit of knowledge and understanding. But the fastest way to learn how to do sales is by doing sales and failing at it, because that real world feedback experience is priceless. And you're going to be able to then take what you picked out from a book and be like, oh, this is what this book is actually talking about here. So I think people need to get the repetitions in. Do you notice a lot of early stage entrepreneurs, a lot of beginning coaches are fearful to first get out there and start selling? And why? Where is that fear coming from? And what can they do to overcome it?
Yes, Frank, you're so good, man. You're speaking my language. Oh man, that's exactly true. Most coaches will do anything they can other than get on a sales call, which is the only thing that makes them a real coach. Like they will revise their website for the fourth or fifth time before they've had a single client. They'll take another course on how to build a course when they've got no people on their email list. These things are not going to produce anything. The marketplace tells us we need to have a podcast, a best-selling book, an email list, funnels, Facebook ads. We need to be on TikTok and YouTube and Clubhouse, and you better be messaging people on LinkedIn, and your website needs to be better, and your email, like you need to be sending a weekly newsletter email to the 0 people on your email list. And yes, all of these strategies have a place for an experienced and thriving coach over a period of time. And I wouldn't even say all, some. No coach should be doing all of those things unless they've got a pretty effective team behind them who's doing it for them. But the reality is, like, if you want to be a coach, real truth here is you're not a coach until people are paying you to coach them. And so you must make a sale. That is the number one job of a coach, because it's the thing that gives you the opportunity to coach. And so rather than do any of those things, you don't actually even need a website. You don't need any kind of technology other than Zoom to be a coach. In fact, for years, I did all of my sales and coaching calls on the phone. I didn't even use Zoom. So I wouldn't even say you need that. All you need is to text message someone you know who's in your target audience and say, hey, I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm doing this now, and I thought of you. I'd love to get on a call to share what I'm doing and see if it may be a fit for you or someone you know. There is nothing in the world that will ever be better than that. And the best sources, the easiest way to grow a business is reach out people in our natural market who know us and trust us already, and to ask for referrals. Those are the easiest ways, but people are so afraid of sales. People are so afraid of sales that when they get on a sales call, they will small talk about everything that they possibly can for as long as they possibly can until most of the call time is gone before they start getting into the sales process. And then it feels awkward and strange because it's like you were there to make a friend. It doesn't feel transparent at all. And now you've got this weird sales pitch squeezed into the very end. They're like, what was that about? And so what we need to do is just be honest and transparent and be courageous enough to do the real work, which for me, when I was a new coach, was to I thought through who's my target audience, who do I want to work with. I went through my phone and I went through every social media I had, name by name by name. This took a few hours with all the social medias that are out there. And I wrote a list on a spreadsheet of all the people who fit the target market, whether I thought I would reach out to them or not, whether I was scared or not. I just put their name on the list. That's not going to accomplish anything, but it's a good first step. And I made a second list at the exact same time. The people who were not my target audience, but maybe a referral partner for me. They may know people in my target audience. And I made those two big lists, and I maybe had 100 or 120 people total between the two lists. And then I started sending text messages. I started having real conversations, getting on calls, asking people questions, and inviting them to what I was doing. And there's no substitute for that. That is the most important thing we could possibly do if we want to be a coach and a successful one.
Dude, I love that so much. Guys, go back and re-listen to the last 4, maybe 3, 4 minutes, because that's worth whatever $10,000 course you're thinking about buying on how to start a business. Because you want to start a business, find a problem, create the solution, transfer the value of exchanging money for that solution, and then deliver upon the solution. We did our first 6 figures here at Rebuild Recovery, literally with Google Docs. Just like you, we did our first like 10 clients on phone calls, and then we transitioned into Zoom. So it was Google Docs, Zoom. I had Instagram, I had a YouTube channel. We had one small opt-in page for a free ebook that immediately upon downloading it drove you to a Calendly, book a call. That was our business, and we made $100,000 doing just
Amazing.
that. Nothing.
Amazing.
There was no website. There was no application funnel with upsells and downsells, cross sells. Now we've integrated and built all that stuff out. We've built incredible courses that are dripped out over the course of 16 weeks. That first 6 figures to prove that I can actually help the men I was trying to help, and give us the income to be able to then go out and build and hire all the team and everything that we needed to get the website up, to build the course, to shoot all the video, all that stuff. But guys, what Justin just shared, if you are trying to start a business, find a problem, develop the solution, message people that have the problem, offer the solution, exchange money for the service of fixing that problem, and then deliver upon the solution. And if you do that well, you do that good enough, that first client's going to refer the second client. Those next 2 clients are going to reduce the next 4. And you almost remove yourself from even having to sell anything or being the salesy, persuasion, influency type of guy. So
yeah, there's a momentum that comes from it when you really like get into doing the real work. All of a sudden sales become easy. All of a sudden people start finding you, but that only comes through the repetition, like you're talking about, doing the real work. We did 250 grand in business our first year, and all I did was reach out to people I knew, referrals, and do free social media marketing on Facebook. Like that was it. Like I just posted on my own Facebook page and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. I sent text messages to people I knew, and I asked people for referrals to people they knew, and that was it. 250 grand in business. Now it's easier if you've spent time, as I'm sure you have, Frank, and like developing key skill sets, identifying the right problem to solve, like you recognize, and developing your character. We call it preparation. Like, hopefully the people listening to this call have spent years already preparing certain skill sets, preparing certain aspects of their character, working on themselves. If they haven't spent years doing it, they're doing it right now on this podcast. And so if you show up the right way in your network and you aim to be a net giver and to serve people generously and to have high integrity and to honor your word when you say you're going to do something, business is just going to find you, but it won't find you until you're in action trying to find it.
Incredible, man. And congrats on the success you guys had there. I mean, anybody that is struggling with, circling back to some of these internal things that we have to change within ourselves, if you're struggling with, I don't have the identity, I'm not a salesperson. The quickest way to get the identity of a salesperson, go sell something. Like, maybe it sounds too simple, but go sell something. Exchange money for goods, money for services. Now you have the identity because you've just done the thing that you didn't believe that you could do. Dude, this is incredible. I'd love to get maybe a little tactical here with somebody. They're like, okay, Frank, we feel you. Now we're kind of fired up. Justin's, he's bringing the fire here today. We're motivated. We're ready to go out there. What are some early steps that somebody can, I don't identify as a salesperson. I've never been a salesperson. I'm not salesy. I don't have influence skills. I'm an introvert. All these kind of limiting beliefs. What are some early steps outside of, obviously, we know the 6 things that we must begin to control? What are some tactical things that somebody can maybe walk away from today and begin to do, read, listen, anything?
Well, I'll say this, like the first steps I think that need to be complete before we can get on a sales call are, number one, we have to be clear on our mission of our business, which to me is, who are you helping? What are you doing for them? Or what problem are you solving, to the language that you shared before? And then why does it matter? So for me, when I put the mission statement together, it's, I help blank do blank so that blank. And so like, it's very hard to sell unless you know what problem you're solving and who you're solving it for. Like that's really critical. So for me, like I help Christian coaches optimize their business models, pricing, and sales strategies so that they can scale their income and their impact. There's my who, my what, and why it matters in there. And so getting that mission statement down is an important first step. Second step is to have a real offer with a real price point. I know people who somehow manage to get themselves on sales calls when they don't have a real offer and they don't know what they're going to sell it for. So they get to the end of the call and they found that like they want to work together. Like, okay, well, I'll email you something, or I'll get back to you, or I'm not sure what we should do. Like, what do you want to do? And like, it's strange. Like, we have to have a real offer with a real price point. And the third thing is we need to be ready to take payments. I know this isn't exactly what you're talking about, but these are the three things for me. You have to be ready to take a payment, which means create an LLC, get a business checking account, and set up a Stripe account or another payment processor so that you can take a credit card like just about any legitimate business in America. So if you've got a mission where you know like who you're working with, what problem you're solving, you've got a real offer with a real price to solve the problem, and you're ready to accept payments, you can get on a sales call. And if you don't know what you're doing, you will learn what to do by being on the call. I would recommend that people though consider having a coach who's going to teach them sales. If they're really like they've never been in sales, they don't know what they're doing, naturally, we've got a sales school for Christian coaches. Like, I'd love to be your coach. I'd love to help you if you feel like you need mentorship in this. But if it's not me, find another mentor. And it doesn't have to be a coach that you pay. It might be a job that you take. So maybe you get a direct sales job if you're young and that's something that you're interested in. If you're old and that's something you're interested in, you want to hone the skill sets, get into direct sales. Maybe you find another coach. Like maybe people listening to this are like, oh my gosh, I love what Frank's doing. Maybe you send Frank a message, say, Frank, I love what you're doing. Can I be a commission only sales rep for you? And get the reps and learn. And like, if you pitch that to Frank or to me or almost any coach that you want to be a commission only sales rep and learn the business from them, most will say yes. I'll tell you that I learned how to sell high ticket coaching packages by taking a startup lead sales job for another coach, and they paid me $1,000 a month salary plus commissions. It was like dirt low income the first year, and it was was not that long ago. It was like 2015. I took that job, and in that first year, maybe earned like 30 grand or something. But within a couple of years, I was earning over six figures. And then when I launched my own business, I was ready, and that's how I was able to do 250 in the first year. And so if you want, go sell on somebody else's dime rather than launch your own coaching business right now. Find a mentor, find a coach. So either like get a training program that's going to help you right now master the skill set, not a training program that's going to help you earn passive income, which is a lie, or a training program that's going to teach you how to do funnels or online courses. If you've got zero audience and zero clients, those things aren't right for you yet. Learn how to make a sale and probably do that through a program that's going to teach you that, or a mentor or another program that you can sell for to get the experience on somebody else's dime.
Yeah. Are there any professions, maybe profession's not the right word, but any jobs outside of selling for other people, right? I love the example there. Go sell high ticket for somebody else. Go sell other people's products if you don't yet have a product. I think that's great. But are there other jobs that people can get early on in their, in their young adult life that'll help equip them with some of the character traits and skill sets needed to succeed in sales?
Yeah, there's probably, I mean, any job that requires interaction with another person where you're going to be dealing with problems and you're going to have to ask questions, you're going to have to respond to questions, you're going to be in some difficult situations and have to learn how to think on your feet. And so I suppose being a waiter or a waitress could be a great opportunity for that. I mean, this is totally different, but no doubt being like a counselor or being in some kind of therapy could work as you're asking questions, you're listening, that sort of thing. That's more of like a deeper profession. But anything in customer service, where you're going to be talking on phones, you're going to be answering calls, you're going to be just connecting with people. So there's so many jobs in the marketplace today that are really communication oriented and customer service. I mean, like even working at the front of a fast food restaurant, at the cash register, taking people's orders. Like I've been in those places where people are just going through the motions, and I have shown up at restaurants and fast food restaurants and all kinds of places like that, and seen occasionally people who were taking their job really seriously, who were providing exceptional customer service, who were creating value in the location by the way they were communicating with the people in front of them. And so, almost no matter what you do, if you just decide that you're going to communicate with courage and boldness and have real conversations with people, you can begin to hone the skill set.
I love that, man. I used to use the drive-through example when I was teaching sales to retail professionals. You were talking about upsells, right? It's like, how do you get people to buy more once you've already made that first initial purchase? And every drive-through does it. Go to McDonald's, order a hamburger. Do you want fries and a Coke with that? That's an upsell. Same thing with a restaurant, the service industry, right? They come, they begin to influence you. Can we get you an appetizer and drinks while you're looking over the menu? They're already beginning to work up that bill because the waiter knows, hey, the higher I get the bill based upon tip percentages, the more money I'm going to make. I would add to what you shared there. I think service is great. I think anything customer service, high end retail locations, right? Where you kind of walk in, they can not personally work with one individual within the store, communication, asking necessary questions, presenting things based upon what their needs and desires are. Those are all great examples there, Justin. Appreciate that. Talk about faith to influence and why specifically you chose to work with Christian business owners.
Yeah, I was working in a secular coaching business that had faith as a component of it, or spirituality as a component of it. It was a very conscious company, but it wasn't Christian. And that divide between like what was so important to me in my Christian faith and the spirituality that was coming through the company, like the divide between the two grew over the years. And ultimately, at some point, it just felt like it wasn't quite right. And so I wanted to do for me. And so I wanted to do, it was still good work for others. I want to be clear about that. Like it was still valuable work, but it wasn't the place where I wanted to live. It wasn't the content I wanted to live out in my life. And when I recognized that and decided that I wanted to be in more of a faith-based environment, I realized that I wanted to do similar work, but in a really Christian way through a Christian lens. And there's really two things. It's like, one, I like being able to pray. I like being able to call God into the equation because I don't have all the answers. And so that's really fun for me, and I get to spend time with people who have similar values, and that's really fun for me. But then also from a business perspective, the more we narrow our niche, the more people will actually find us. So it's kind of counterintuitive. People think, "Oh, I want to work with everybody. I don't want to exclude anybody." I'm not excluding people. I work with non-Christians all the time. I got hired by David Bayer to sell at his event a few weeks ago and sold 280 grand for him at his event. And it was a really big opportunity for us. He's paying 10% commission. That's a really big win for me as a business to get to sell for him. And I love supporting the work that he's doing. But narrowing in and saying, I work with Christian coaches as my primary audience makes it easy for the right people to find me and say, oh my gosh, this is for me. And so there's the element of like that it is more compelling for me personally. It's more fun for me personally to get to spend time with those types of people most of my time. But then also from a business perspective, it's actually smarter to narrow the niche.
Yeah, 100%, man. David's a beast, dude. Like I had the opportunity to do a lot of work with David. We ran his marketing with an agency. I was back in 2019, 2020. Such a strong entrepreneur. I mean, his just his bandwidth and just superpower is like logistics, data, all these things. He runs these incredible events as well. So that's
Yeah,
awesome, man.
more
What an amazing
organized than
experience.
almost anybody I know. Like,
Bro,
and
his
we've sold
brain,
for a lot
like
of
the
people,
amount
but
of information he stores within his brain is
yeah,
just like, dude, how do you
yeah.
remember that? We talked about that 6 weeks ago, and he's like, well, he told me it was gonna be this, and I was like, oh my god, dude, like
His wife
incredible.
Carol too. She might even be a step above him in that. They're both
She
pretty
cracks the whip for
incredible.
sure, man. Yeah, from a service base, they were fun to
Yeah,
work with because they have an incredible company and they're doing incredible work.
yeah.
But if you're not on point with what, like, it's gonna keep you up at night. So that's amazing, man.
Uh,
Justin, this has been absolutely incredible, brother. I really enjoyed it. I feel like we could chat for hours, man. Tell the audience, tell the men where they can connect with you, where to find you best, where you're hanging out socially, any big upcoming projects. And I think you mentioned you got kind of a 10-point checklist or something that we can give away here. So share all that. We'll bring today's conversation to a close with our last and final question here.
Yeah, no doubt. If people want to continue the process of learning about sales, you can check out our podcast. It's the Sales Strategies for Christian Coaches podcast. The content, though, is just as good for a non-Christian as a Christian. So as long as you're okay with me bringing a little bit of God, a little bit of Jesus into it, check it out. The best way to get connected to us, though, would be to go to www.goodsalespdf.com, Good Sales PDF, and that's going to get you our 10-step sales process. So if you are a coach or aspire to potentially be a coach, or even an entrepreneur or a different type of salesperson, this 10-step process will be exactly how we close millions of dollars worth of deals. And it's a really high integrity, high converting process. I do want to ask Frank, before we wrap up, do you want to return to the one question about faith, or is it open too big of a can of worms? I know some of your listeners might have caught that you were going to come back to that and maybe curious. I just want to give you that.
Thank you for circling back. I mean, I was chewing on this the entire time. Do I want to go there? Do I want to go there? When I go there? Since you brought it back up, we're going to go there if you're okay with that. So I kind of touched on it, right? I think, and this is going to be more an opinion here. And like I said, hopefully it doesn't get either one of us in trouble. Um, I'm turned off, to be completely honest with you, with people that lead with God in their business. Join my mastermind because God's here. Well, God's everywhere that I am. I don't need to give you $20,000 to speak to God. I can do that in my chair downstairs every single morning. I can do that at church. Um, so I don't know, man. I'm not exactly sure where I'm even trying to lead this question. It's something I haven't asked a lot of people about. It's kind of been some behind the closed doors conversation I've had with other influencers within the space. Just what are your thoughts and takes on kind of, I feel that God is being hijacked by influencers and the term is being overused and it's becoming manipulative to a way. And I'm worried that it's going to take away the real meaning of faith, of a relationship with God. Just curious your thoughts. I know that's kind of big, loaded.
I love it. I'm grateful you brought it up. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. It becomes one of those interesting things. Like, I understand how you feel because I've definitely seen it also in a way that triggers me and doesn't
And real
feel
quick,
right.
Justin, I just want to
Yeah,
add. So I am a baby Christian. I came to my
yeah,
faith in 2018. So I lived
yeah.
35 years on this planet, running around, doing everything that I thought I wanted to do, and living that kind of life within the world. So as I've been a Christian now for 5 going on 6 years, it's like I'm looking at, okay, well, this is going on over there. I don't really like the way that well, church is great, but it's kind of been feminized, right? So I need to get plugged into some men's group here. So I'm navigating this, and I'm really asking this for my own understanding. So I'll just add that layer of context. Like, probably don't have the right answer, or maybe my opinion is way off, but I just thought that was maybe important to kind of add for
No,
you
that's
to
fair.
understand where I'm coming from.
That's fair. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I've seen people show up in the marketplace around their faith in a way that does feel sleazy. It feels wrong. It feels manipulative. It doesn't feel right. It is one of those things like what we talked about before, where the line is a little bit fuzzy. It's a little bit gray, and it's about intention a lot. And like the line between manipulation and influence, like we talked about, that like intention really matters. Now, for me to be able to say that, like, I want to coach Christian coaches specifically, I'm not a pastor, I'm not selling God, but I want to be able to make sure that I'm like running things through the lens of like the integrity that like Jesus calls us to, and how we were supposed to love our neighbors, how we're supposed to show up. And so by me claiming that that's the audience I want to serve, I'm teaching the sales content. You heard my sales content today. It's just as good for a non-Christian as a Christian. But I like being able to pray with my clients. I like being able to invite God into space. God is there anyways, but I want to invite him. Like, I want to bring the prayer to him. I want to be able to say, gosh, that's a great question. I don't have the answer to that question, but let me pray about this, and see if God can present something for us. I'm certainly not using the language like, oh, and I've seen somebody do this. I can think of one coach in particular who I've seen in the marketplace. Like, God wants you to be here. And they're like in the prophetic. I'm like, God told me this. God wants you to do this and that sort of thing. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a theologian, or theologian. I'm not working in the prophetic. I'm not telling people that God told me that they should do something. I would never do any of those things. So for me, what I know is that, like, if I taught the same content and just said it's for coaches, and I was teaching the exact same sales content, people would be fine with it. And there are sometimes people who are like, "Oh, why are you selling God?" That I decided to say this is for Christian coaches, but ultimately, like, I know that Christian coaches have some belief systems, some stories from the Bible, from their faith, from their church growing up, that are like a specific set of problems that maybe other coaches aren't facing in the same ways, that I want to be able to address. Like, people believing like money is the root of all evil, when God says in the Bible, the love of money is the root of all evil. And that distinction is really important. Making an idol of money is really a bad thing. But earning money to do good with it is not a bad thing. And so, like, that kind of story, as an example, is something that's shared by my audience that wouldn't necessarily be shared in the exact same way. I also talk to my audience about tithing and giving. The podcast episode I released today is about how we have plenty and we ought to give. And the more that we give, the more we receive. And I want to talk specifically about tithing and giving and the way that we show up in the community. And of course, a non-Christian can do all of these things and give financially, give of their time, be super generous, super high integrity, super loving. And I'm happy to have them in my community. But just like somebody would say, you've got a men's group, how ridiculous would it be for somebody to say, oh my gosh, like how unfair that women aren't allowed in your group? And as crazy as it is, people would say something like that. And it's appropriate to have men's only group. It's appropriate to have a women's group. It's appropriate inside of the larger church to have a Bible study. Like all of these things can be okay. And all of these things can be done very poorly. There can be women's groups that hate men. There can be men's group that hate women. There can be Christian groups that are judgmental of everyone else, or where the coach is like speaking as if he's got this prophetic word about what people should do from God, and it's actually just their own thing that they're making up. And it's so tricky, and it can be confusing. I'm grateful you brought it to the conversation. All I can do is suggest that if people are going to bring faith directly into their business and speak it into their business as like a target audience, you have to be especially careful because you're under a microscope, and it's important to do it the right way, and not everyone is. So I honor where you're coming from and what you're sharing, and I don't have all the answers for everyone, but kind of like sales is blank or sales with me is blank, we have to apply it to ourselves and make sure that we're just showing up and honoring our integrity in the way that we're doing things.
Yeah, and that's great, man. And I appreciate you, kind of exploring that there with me as well. Full transparency. Like faith is a part of our work. Like you're going to go into our program. There's going to be specific scripture. There's going to be specific prayers. We're going to pray together on our group calls. We're going to call on the brothers when time is in need. Right. So it's because it's a part of me that I'm sharing through it. But it's not I don't believe it's the only part, or it's the part that's going to make you be successful, right? We've had a lot of non-believers. We've had a lot of agnostic, atheists, Muslims, people from all worldviews succeed in what we're doing because the faith is one part of it. It's backed by science, it's backed by all these other small little bits. Now, we want to encourage, because obviously discipleship is spreading the word of God. And if you are a Christian and you're a believer, then you have a worldview that there's one way to the ultimate, right? But I'm not here to force that upon anybody. So I appreciate you kind of exploring that there with me as well. And that's kind of what I've tried to integrate into the work that we're doing here as well. So last question, Justin, we end every single episode here with the same question. Obviously the title of the show is called The Superman Life. And as we're kind of piggybacking off this faith topic here, the way that I describe or when I talk about living a Superman life, it's really a belief system, or it's a way that I try to show up in the world every single day. So as a believer, I do come from the place that I believe that we're all here for a purpose. There's a calling on each one of our lives. Yours is in the coaching, influence, persuasion kind of space. I think you're living that out. But for most people, accepting or understanding that you're here for a purpose, I don't believe is enough. We must be intentional about our growth, about our development, and how we're bringing that purpose to the world in service of other people. So when you pair those two, that's how I define living a superhuman life. But Justin Janowski, as we end today's conversation, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Living a superhuman life. I mean, as a Christian, I think one of my aims is to love God and love my neighbors better. And it's also to, yes, find my place in the world and like the mission that I can pursue. And for me, it's like changing the way people feel about sales and helping people sell in a way that has high integrity and high conversion and love. But more than like what I'm doing in business, like I ultimately feel like the greatest calling on men is to honor the people closest to them, their family, their neighbors, certainly their wives and their kids. If they've got that kind of family environment, I honestly think that most of the problems in the world would go away if every man would just lead his own house really well. And we don't have enough men leading their houses well. We need to show up better as husbands. We need to show up better as fathers. We need to be present rather than absent. And so far more than anything that we do in the marketplace or in the work that we're doing is that we just lead our own family well, take care of business at home.
Amen to that, brother. That's why we say our mission here at Rebuilt Recovery is to help men become better men by rebuilding or by quitting porn and rebuilding their lives. So right in line with, like, we need stronger men. We need to rise up together here. And we need more men like yourself out there leading the charge here. So Justin, it's been absolutely an honor here today having you guys. Make sure to connect with Justin. Download the 10-step PDF. We'll get all that link down there in the show notes. If you're new here and this is your first episode, guys, thank you so much. You can give back. You can support us by leaving that 5-star rating and written review. But more important, there's somebody going through in your life right now is going through some struggles. Maybe they're struggling to find their way in sales, or they want to get a business off the ground. Do us a favor and do them the blessing by sharing today's conversation with them. But for Justin Janowski, Faith to Influence, your host, Frank Rich, we love you guys. We'll see you next week.